Hey, this is Jared Dees from thereligionteacher.com. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus is an important story for us to hear because it tells us as a warning sign of how we should live our lives. So Jesus tells this parable of a rich man and a poor, sick man named Lazarus. And in this story, the rich man, sees Lazarus who's sick and suffering, doesn't help him. But then they both die. What happens to the rich man? His comfort, his luxury, turns into pain and suffering. He essentially goes to what we might think of as hell. He's burning in the fires of hell in pain instead of that life of comfort that he lived during his worldly life. What about Lazarus? He was sick and suffering. He was poor. And what happened to him after he died? He was comforted. In this story, Jesus talks about the rich man seeing far off the man Lazarus united with Abraham in essentially what we might think of as kind of like heaven. And Abraham, who's the father of course, the people of Israel, can hear the rich man speak. And the rich man says to Abraham, send Lazarus back to warn my brothers not to live like I did. And of course, Lazarus doesn't do that, but Abraham says to the rich man, they already have the law, they already have the prophets. Why would they listen to someone who rises from the dead? And of course, Jesus in the parable is referring to his future resurrection, right? That hopefully the people who are greedy, who are living like the rich man, hear this message of the risen Lord and repent and change and stop being so greedy. But they already have the law, they already have the prophets. What is it going to take for you to listen, essentially, is what Jesus is saying, right? And that's what he does. Jesus does rise from the dead in order to allow us to be free from that greed, from that selfishness. But specifically, what can we get out of this parable? What does this parable mean for us today? That if you're like the rich man and you're living a life with some comfort, recognize that maybe we need to make some sacrifices. So make a sacrifice. And sacrifices meaning there's some pain there. And give. If you see pain in the world, if you see suffering in the world, if you see someone who is poor and in need, give. That rather than trying to seek a life of richness and comfort and happiness in that way of this world, instead recognize that if I want to be happy for eternity, I need to make sacrifices and give to others that are in need. Secondly, if we're like Lazarus and we're suffering in the world today, recognize that suffering will turn into joy. Maybe not even in this world, but in the next life. It's no coincidence that if you look at the lives of the saints throughout history, many of them suffered physical sicknesses. Many of them were suffering, poverty or pain within their lives because they recognized that the joy of the resurrection is coming. That true joy isn't tied to the comforts of this world. And that suffering has a purpose later on. And finally, thinking about, what is heaven and hell like? It's something for us to ponder there. And this parable really did influence a lot of our historical representations of heaven and hell. Of course, we don't know what heaven and hell will be like, but this parable gives us clues. This motif of the idea of fire and brimstone, fire being a way of experiencing pain in hell. The parable gives us a little bit of clue. The rich man is isolated, he's in pain, he's separated, and then Lazarus is united with others, in this case, Abraham. That we should be afraid of a punishment for living such a rich, greedy life. And we should be looking forward to this heaven of unity with others, of alleviation of the suffering that we have of this world because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So listening to this parable, hearing these words, hopefully it convinces us not to live like the rich man, but to help people who are like Lazarus, to make sacrifices, to give to others. And if we are suffering, recognize that there will be some alleviation of that pain with comfort within the faith we have in God, both in thinking about what's going to happen to us after we die. Heaven or hell is coming, whether we realize it or not. So how should we live today? Go make disciples. God bless.